Church of the Brethren annual conference was in Greensboro, North Carolina, last week, concluding on Sunday. And a lot of the focus of that conference was on worship, and I felt that the worship was excellent and that the sermons were excellent. And so I, as I often do, had taken notes on those sermons and kept them. And this week, at the beginning of the week, I was looking through those, and it just seemed to me that they all focused on the theme of the conference, which was Proclaim Christ, Reclaim Passion. What a great theme. Proclaim Christ, Reclaim Passion. But then one thing I noticed that while they centered on that theme, they also addressed topics related to the Christian's relationship to the world in which we live, which I think many of us experience as a very troubled and chaotic world with a lot of dissension and bad feelings within our own country, our own society, politically, socially, culturally. In many ways, we seem to be going in different directions. And that is troubling to many of us. And so there are things that are out there that seem to prevent us from proclaiming Christ and reclaiming that passion that we would like to have for our faith and for ministry to others. And as I looked at the sermon themes and topics that were discussed, I kind of came to the conclusion that there are maybe three ways, I'm sure there are more, but I'm going to address three over the next 3 Sundays, 3 ways of responding to this present world in which we live. One of those is with fear. Another is anxiety or depression, just kind of checking out. And another is anger. And there's certainly a lot of anger out there. And these are all emotions that I think are very prevalent today. And emotions with which we probably all struggle to some extent or another. And so today I'm going to talk about the first of those, which is fear. The preacher on Sunday morning of last week was Tim Harvey. Some of you probably know Tim. He grew up in Broadway. He's a pastor in Roanoke now. He was annual conference moderator a few years ago. And he began his message by asking everybody to take out their keys and hold them up. You have keys, you can hold them up if you do. We've all got keys. I don't know if we have them in our pocket or not. If you drove to church, you probably have keys. You probably brought them with you. You probably didn't leave them in your car, even at church, in this world, in this society. But we have all kinds of keys because we have stuff that we think needs to be locked. And safety is a high priority. It seems like it's a higher priority for some people than others. I know people who actually leave their keys in their car at home, or at least they used to until their car got stolen one night and they went out to work the next morning and my wife said, "Where's my car?" Well, it was in a field a couple miles away and the keys were in it, so it could have been worse, but we don't leave them in the car anymore. Even we take our keys in the house. But safety is an issue. Tim Harvey had a quote from the Shakers. Anybody know who the Shakers are? It was a religious group. I'm not sure there are any Shakers left, but historically they were called Shakers because part of their worship they would sort of shake and dance. But one of their sayings was, "All should be so trustworthy that locks and keys are needless." Now we can agree with that. Everybody should be so trustworthy that we didn't need locks anymore. But we're pretty sure they aren't. And so we lock up stuff. We have our keys. We are not totally trusting, not not naively so. Our society, as I say, emphasizes safety, emphasizes security. Security is a growth industry, you know. Home security, personal security, security systems, that's a big deal anymore. There's one locally that I just couldn't help myself. I stopped in front of their sign one day and was taking a picture of it. And the woman came running out of the office and said, "May I help you?" I said, no, I'm just taking a picture, and I jumped back in my car. But it lists the name of the security company and all the information, and then at the bottom it says, "In God we trust." Now I'm thinking, if you take that sign literally, then why do you need them? But anyway, it's kind of ironic. That's the world in which we live. We're called to trust in God, but be sure to lock up your stuff and buy one of our security systems. Jesus in Matthew 6 in the Sermon on the Mount says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal." So obviously they had the same problem that we potentially do. But he said, rather store up your treasures in heaven. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Good reminder. And yet, we buy into this whole feeling of fear and of the necessity to protect our stuff, to protect ourselves, to protect our families, to protect our very lives. We are warned constantly of all the perceived enemies out there, foreign and domestic. Cybersecurity is a whole new area in which we can become fearful. And so we debate things like firewalls and border walls, and we argue about the best ways to keep ourselves safe, our nation safe, and we don't all agree by any means on those things. Fear is real, and it affects each of us in a variety of ways. I actually Googled the word fear. There's a whole bunch of sayings. A lot of them didn't make a lot of sense, but one said, the oldest and strongest emotion of humankind is fear. The oldest and strongest emotion. And maybe it is. I guess it is. Fear can sometimes seem to be overwhelming. There's a German proverb. Google this as well. Fear makes the wolf bigger than he is. You know, that's true. Fear causes us to think things are a lot worse, or a lot more frightening, or a lot more dangerous than they really are. Phobias. Phobias are fears that are out of proportion to the actual danger. There are many, many phobias. Probably all of us have some kind of phobia. Overly afraid of something or some situation. I'm claustrophobic. I don't like tight spaces. I don't like elevators at all. I don't ride them if I don't have to. But that's a phobia. Elevators aren't that dangerous. I don't like them. So, rational or not, we have fears. It's something we all experience in deep and personal ways. And we live in a society where fear and suspicion are rampant. And those feelings distract us and hamper us from productive living and sometimes from faithful living. I was trying to think of scripture texts that would address this topic of fear. And one that certainly came to mind is this one in Matthew 14. The disciples out there in the boat, and it apparently was already night, and then this storm comes up. Now they're on the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is not really a sea, it's an inland lake, but it's big enough. It's, I think it's like 13 miles by 6 miles or something. Rhonda would know that, but she's in the nursery. She was just there recently. And so Jesus had gone to the mountain to pray. He'd sent the disciples on ahead to cross over the lake. and it was dark, and a storm came, and it says the boat was being battered by the waves. They were far from land, and it's natural that those disciples would be afraid. We all would. But then they saw something that kind of upgraded their fear to absolute terror. If the storm wasn't bad enough, they saw something coming toward them on top of the water, looking like a person. A ghost. It's the only thing they could think of. And so they cried out in fear, it says. But Jesus responded. Take heart, it is I. Don't be afraid. There came Jesus walking on the water toward them. And Peter, who's always the impulsive one and the adventurous one, cried out, Lord, I want to come to you out there on the water. If you can walk on water, I can too. And Jesus says, okay, well, come on then. And so Peter hops out of the boat, and apparently he took a few steps and it worked, but then he began to look around and he saw the waves and he saw the wind and he started to sink. And Jesus grabbed him. And Jesus says, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Apparently he was walking just fine until he began to doubt. And that sunk him. So what do we get from this story? Well, probably a lot of things, but first of all, I think sometimes we should be afraid. You know, it keeps us from doing stupid stuff, dangerous stuff. And some dangers are very real. The wind and the waves in the middle of the night out on the lake in a small boat, that's a reason to be really, really fearful. We may not have been in that kind of danger, but we can all think of situations in which we were in real danger. Maybe our fault or not. But then in this story, Jesus comes to them in the midst of their storm, as Jesus will come to us in the midst of our storms. And he is there. But at first they didn't recognize him. And probably we don't either. When we're the most fearful, might be the time that Jesus is there wanting to help us, but we're least likely to recognize him. And maybe we become even more afraid. Remember, fear makes the wolf bigger than he is. Then we have this psalm, and I could have used plenty of psalms, but this Psalm 55, a psalm of David, where he is facing some unnamed enemies, it seems. And there's different versions of this. The New RSV, it states him saying, I am distraught, my heart is in anguish within me, the terrors of death have fallen upon me, fear and trembling come upon me, horror overwhelms me. Wow. We can identify an accurate description of sheer terror, overwhelming fear. We've been there. And what to do? David says, I wish I had wings. I wish I was a dove and I could fly out of this mess and go far away to a safe place. Yeah, we all wish that sometimes. But then in verse 16, it's like a revelation or a reminder comes to him, the sudden awareness that he is not alone in his trouble. But I call upon God, and the Lord will save me. He will redeem me, unharmed from the battle waged against me. He realizes God is there. God will be there to protect, to redeem, to save him, as he does us as well. So the disciples in the boat, back to them, suddenly see that Jesus has indeed come to them. That it is Jesus, and Peter is the one who wants to respond, but with no plan and too little faith, he steps out of the boat. And then he looks around and sees the wind and the waves, and fear sinks him as fear can sink us. Even when Jesus is right there, Jesus has to reach out and rescue him. Jesus is present in the midst of that storm and in the midst of our storm. in the midst of our mistakes, in the midst of our failures, in the midst of our stupid stuff that we do to endanger ourselves. Jesus is there. It's often been pointed out that Peter's mistake there was that he began to take his focus off of Jesus and look around at the danger. Right. He was doing okay as long as he was looking into the eyes of his Lord. But he looked away, looked at the storm and the danger out there, and that's when he started to go beneath the waves. And fear can certainly do that. So often we only see the storm, see this, the problems, the dangers, rather than seeing and focusing on the source of our help and our salvation, which is in Christ. Now, there was another annual conference sermon, too, I want to address a bit, and this was by Jeremy Ashworth. He's a pastor in Phoenix, Arizona, Saturday night message, and he was preaching on the theme of service, of serving others, which, as he said, should be a very safe topic for brethren, because we're all about service. That's one thing we feel like we do. We serve others, we're helpful, we want to be. That's part of our DNA. But he said, you know, service itself is not always safe. There are risks in serving. And he didn't use this story, but this is what I thought of. It's the Good Samaritan story, where you have the priest and the Levite. The man was in the ditch, bleeding, beaten up, and the priest and the Levite walked on by. And preachers sometimes speculate on why that was, and there could be a number of reasons. But one of them might have been that they were afraid. You know, you see somebody who appears to be in danger, it could be a setup. Maybe his friends had just poured ketchup on him and they were back behind a rock somewhere waiting to attack you if you help him. So they kept going, other side of the road. So consequently, they missed that opportunity. They missed that opportunity to be the good neighbor in that story. And it was because of their fear. Perhaps because of their fear. So Jeremy Ashworth then challenged us to do the opposite of what we're inclined to do. He said, do the thing that takes you outside of your comfort zone. And then he used the term, serve scared. Now that's a different way of talking about it. Serve scared. I like that. Made me think. I've learned that when I do something that I feel like I really should do, need to do, maybe feel called to do, but it's frightening, it doesn't come naturally, I want to do the opposite, that when I do that, I receive a blessing from it. That's almost inevitably the case, that the things that are the most difficult are also the things that bring the greatest blessing. Sometimes it's just important to do that thing that is really hard to do. And yet, deep down, we know that it needs to be done. Whether that's helping a neighbor, whether it's reaching out to doing something new, a new career, a new job, a new ministry, whatever it is, we find that we receive a blessing when we step out in faith in spite of our fears. I was thinking about us going door to door to give invitations to these community picnics. And frankly, we usually don't have very many people help with that. Usually it's kind of the same four. And I think people are scared, frankly. I think that a lot of us are just, gee, I want to do that, but I don't want to do that. I don't like meeting people. I don't like knocking on doors. I could get dog bit. I could get a door slammed in my face. Most of us don't really like to go up to strangers and invite them to something. And people are wary of solicitation. A lot of people don't want strangers coming to their door. So it's really hard. Now, this past week, we did have a couple of more people do that. I don't know that they were comfortable at the beginning, but we needed help because we knew several people weren't going to be here. So I think Sharon prevailed on Ann and Becky during women's Bible study. Maybe guilted them into it. I'm not sure, but they did, and they survived. Amazingly, we had plenty of help. It was great. So don't miss the chance next time we give invitation. It's a challenge to invite people, to do something as simple as inviting people to a community picnic, or maybe a little more threatening. Many of us are really find it uncomfortable to share our faith with others. But okay, if that's too much, can we invite somebody to come to church with us? Just keep it simple. And that's a bit uncomfortable as well. But let's step out. Do the thing that scares us. Serve scared. It's what Jeremy Ashworth said. Good point. Some other examples. Jack and Tina are going to Puerto Rico on Saturday. I don't know if they're scared or not, but it's a real opportunity for service, and we want to pray for them. It's hot down there. It's hot here. It's really hot down there. But we serve. They're serving with Brethren Disaster Ministries. And I mentioned this thing at Arbor Hill Church, a church that's kind of one foot in the grave, I guess. 8 people, I think, regularly attend. We're being asked to help them. Well, do we want to? Well, if we send people up there, that's less people here. That's one way to look at it. But I think God's math is different from that. When we go out and serve in Jesus' name, He provides for our needs as well. Usually blesses us in amazing ways that we don't understand, but it works that way. I can attest to that. So let us do that. Let us serve even if we have to serve scared. Let us remember that fear is destructive. It isolates people from one another. It robs us of opportunities to help others and serve others. It robs us of the chance to develop relationships with people whom we don't know, who might bless us and might become our friends. If we're willing to walk with Jesus, we need to have faith enough to step out of the boat. We need to face our fears and sometimes to serve scared. And when we do that, Jesus will be there to take our hand and to protect us and help us and bless us.